Welcome to today's FNEC webinar, Hypertension, the Lowdown on High Blood Pressure. This is Holly Gum speaking, and I'll be your presenter today. This webinar will last 1 hour and will be recorded. Immediately after the webinar, you will receive an online webinar evaluation. The webinar recording, slides, and a list of resources about hypertension will be posted on the FNEC website after the webinar. The objectives for this webinar are: you will learn what hypertension is and why you should be concerned about it. You'll learn lifestyle changes you can make to change your risk for high blood pressure and its complications. We'll also learn similarities and differences between the DASH and MyPlate eating plans. And finally, you will practice how to respond when participants ask you about high blood pressure. What questions do you have before we begin? Please type questions into the chat box and send them to me, the presenter. So, high blood pressure, also called hypertension, is a major risk factor for several chronic diseases. Despite effective methods to control hypertension, high blood pressure continues to be widespread in the United States, affecting more than 80 million adults. In today's webinar, we'll look at high blood pressure, what it does to increase risk for chronic disease, and what individuals can do to reduce and control their blood pressure. Last year, nutrition educators were surveyed on nutrition topics they would like to see in a webinar format. Almost half of respondents asked for more information about high blood pressure. What would you like to learn about high blood pressure in this webinar? Just write your answers in the chat box and send them to me. Okay, thank you for sharing your questions with me, or your what you want to learn. And I believe we're going to cover all of these topics, so thank you. What is high blood pressure and why is it a problem? Blood pressure is the force of blood pushing against the walls of the arteries as the heart pumps blood. If this pressure rises and stays high over time, it can damage the body in many ways. Blood pressure is measured using a device called a sphygmomanometer and is reported in the millimeters of mercury that balance the pressure in an artery. You can see this is an old style sphygmomanometer. The first sphygmomanometer was invented in the late 1800s and used mercury expansion to measure blood pressure. In recent years, there has been a concern about the use of mercury and its potential to contaminate the environment. Consequently, new styles of sphygmomanometers that do not use mercury are now widely used. Here's an example of one of those. Sphygmomometers measure two numbers. They measure the systolic blood pressure when the heart is pumping oxygen-rich blood to the arteries, and diastolic refers to the blood pressure in the arteries when the heart is resting between beats. Blood pressure is reported as two numbers, and it's the systolic blood pressure over the diastolic blood pressure. And there's an example there, 120/80. millimeters of mercury. Also, people will say 120/80 points or units. So what is the blood pressure reading that indicates hypertension? Categories are listed on this slide, and this table is also in your worksheet on page 1. So let's go through the categories. Normal blood pressure is systolic blood pressure less than 120 and diastolic less than 80. Pre-hypertension is when the systolic blood pressure is 120 to 139, or if the diastolic is between 80 and 89. So I just want to mention that if either one of the systolic or the diastolic measures are high, then you have pre-hypertension. Hypertension is defined as stage 1, systolic 140 to 159, or a diastolic reading of 90 to 99. And stage 2 hypertension is a systolic reading of 160 or higher, and a diastolic reading of 100 or higher. It should be noted that blood pressure rises and falls throughout the day and over time. So medical professionals will look at your blood pressure over time to assess what category you fall into. So what is your blood pressure category? Before we began the webinar earlier in the week, I had asked you to bring some recent blood pressure readings with you so that you could take this challenge. So if you could take a moment and identify which category you fall into, and feel free to keep this information private. Why should we be concerned about high blood pressure? 1 in 3 adults in the U.S. is hypertensive. And high blood pressure is widespread. This is based on self-report, and so is an underestimate. It is estimated that an additional 1 in 5 people have hypertension and don't know it. And pre-hypertension, 1 in 3 adults is pre-hypertensive. This leads to increased risk for developing hypertension. And high blood pressure puts you at increased risk for heart disease, stroke, and kidney disease. When people are diagnosed with high blood pressure, the healthcare provider will prescribe medications and lifestyle modifications to reduce and control their blood pressure. Only 50% of people diagnosed with high blood pressure have their high blood pressure under control. And control is defined as having blood pressure below 140/90 and on antihypertensive medication. This map shows the prevalence of high blood pressure in the United States, and you can see it varies by region. The darker red the state is, the more adults have high blood pressure. So in this map, the very light colored states have an adult, the percentage of adults with high blood pressure varies between approximately 25 and 28%, and it goes all the way up to, in the southeast, the dark red states where they have blood pressure in the adult population between 33 and 39% high blood pressure. The CDC has summarized some of these data in an infographic, and I'm going to give you a reference sheet at the end of this webinar, and it has a link to this infographic if you'd like a copy yourself. So in this graphic, it points out 1 in 3 adults has high blood pressure. High blood pressure contributes to 1,000 deaths per day. And when you have high blood pressure, you're 4 times more likely to die of a stroke, and you're 3 times more likely to die of heart disease compared to somebody who doesn't have high blood pressure. And the costs of high blood pressure to society are enormous. $46 billion is spent on direct medical expenses, and $3.6 billion is lost in worker productivity because of disability due to high blood pressure. The second half of the infographic describes the benefits of controlling high blood pressure, which is defined, as we mentioned earlier, having high blood pressure below 140/90. Only half the people with high blood pressure have their blood pressure under control. And if the average systolic blood pressure were dropped by 12 to 13 units of mercury, it would result in the following reductions in disease incidence in our country. There would be 37% fewer cases of stroke, 21% fewer cases of heart disease, 25% fewer deaths from cardiovascular disease, and 13% fewer deaths from all causes. Lastly, the infographic summarizes lifestyle changes that will help reduce high blood pressure, and we'll talk about that in a minute. How does high blood pressure affect the body? High blood pressure exerts strong forces against blood vessel walls, as we mentioned earlier. This strong force over time can harden the arteries and cause them to constrict, build up, constrict, and get narrower. This leads to over time, this causes heart failure, where the heart can no longer pump enough blood and oxygen to other parts of the body. Heart attack, which occurs if the flow of oxygen-rich blood to the section of a heart muscle suddenly becomes blocked. This causes a section of the heart muscle to die. The longer the heart muscle is deprived of oxygen, the more muscle tissue dies. It also leads to stroke. Hardening and constricting of the blood vessels in the brain can lead to a blockage of a blood vessel or rupture of a blood vessel, leading to brain tissue death due to insufficient oxygen getting to the brain. And kidney disease can be caused by high blood pressure. When there is insufficient flow of blood to the kidney cells die, causing severe kidney damage. In summary, decreased oxygenated blood flow to tissues severely damages vital organs. What causes high blood pressure? In more than 95% of cases, the cause of high blood pressure is unknown. This is called primary or essential hypertension. Primary hypertension develops over many years. In very rare cases, high blood pressure is caused by an underlying condition that affects the kidneys, arteries, hearts, or endocrine system. This is called secondary hypertension. And an example of secondary hypertension is preeclampsia, or hypertension of pregnancy. So it is the pregnancy is the condition that makes the existing blood pressure worse or may cause high blood pressure to develop. In this webinar, we will not address secondary hypertension. We'll be focusing on primary hypertension, the most common. While the cause of hypertension is largely unknown, there are factors that put you at increased risk for hypertension. These include prehypertension, as we mentioned earlier, age. Blood pressure tends to rise with age, and about 65% of Americans over age 60 have high blood pressure. Gender impacts your risk for hypertension. Both men and women are at risk for high blood pressure, but men are more likely to get high blood pressure before the age of 45, and after age 65, women are more likely to have high blood pressure. Race and ethnicity impacts your risk for getting high blood pressure. High blood pressure is more common in African Americans. High blood pressure is more common in African American adults than white or Hispanic American adults. Family history of heart disease is also a risk factor for hypertension. So family history of heart disease and family history of high blood pressure and heart disease is also a risk factor. Finally, long-lasting stress increases risk for high blood pressure. There are lifestyle factors that also put you at increased risk for high blood pressure. These include a dietary pattern that is high in saturated fat, high in sodium, low in fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. A sedentary lifestyle puts you at increased risk for high blood pressure. Overweight and obesity increases your risk for high blood pressure. And drinking too much alcohol also puts you at risk for high blood pressure. What actions can you take to reduce your risk for high blood pressure? Write your answer on the webinar worksheet, page 2. As we discussed, uncontrolled high blood pressure can lead to heart attack, stroke, kidney failure, and death. The good news is there are actions you can take to control high blood pressure or lower your risk of high blood pressure if you are hypertensive. You can change lifestyle factors that put you at increased risk for high blood pressure. We'll talk about these more in a minute. And if you have high blood pressure, talk to your doctor about the best treatment for you. What questions do you have? Please type questions into the chat box and send them to the presenter. Okay, now we're going to do a quick quiz to check your knowledge about high blood pressure. Complete the quiz located on the last page of your worksheet. We'll review the answers in a couple of minutes. The first question was, What is the most desirable and healthiest blood pressure reading? The answer is below 120/80. Optimal blood pressure is lower than 120/80 millimeters of mercury. If your blood pressure is greater than 140/90, you're at higher risk for heart disease, stroke, kidney disease, and other complications from high blood pressure. Question 2. People who have high blood pressure are at risk for what disease? The answer is C, stroke. People with high blood pressure are at increased risk for hardening and narrowing of the arteries. Stroke occurs when hardened and narrow blood vessels in the brain get blocked. Blocked are called ischemic stroke, or if the blood vessels rupture, it's called hemorrhagic stroke. Question 3. The main cause of high blood pressure is B, unknown. Doctors rarely know what causes high blood pressure. While the cause is unknown, there are steps you can take to control high blood pressure. Lifestyle changes are the first step. If lifestyle changes aren't enough to get your blood pressure to a normal level, your doctor may prescribe medication. Which of these groups has the highest risk for high blood pressure? A, African Americans. 40% of adult African Americans have high blood pressure. High blood pressure tends to happen at an earlier age and is more severe for many Africans. Number 5. If you have pre-hypertension, what actions can you take to reduce your risk for high blood pressure? Eat a healthier diet, exercise more, maintain a healthy weight, all of the above. The answer is D, the above. Each lifestyle change you make reduces your risk for high blood pressure. The more changes you make, the better. Now that you know the risks of high blood pressure, how might this knowledge influence what you talk about at your next appointment with your healthcare provider? Please write your answer on your worksheet, page 2. Now we're going to talk about lifestyle changes to control high blood pressure. What lifestyle changes have you heard about that lower your chances of getting high blood pressure? Type your answer into the chat box and send it to everyone. As we have learned, having uncontrolled high blood pressure can cause chronic disease and even death. The good news is there are lifestyle changes a person can make to reduce high blood pressure and so decrease risk for chronic diseases. These recommended changes are based on well-designed research studies that showed these lifestyle changes resulted in a reduction in blood pressure. The recommended changes are: choose a healthy eating pattern, reduce dietary sodium, choose an active lifestyle, maintain a healthy weight, and limit consumption of alcohol. I wanted to mention that a healthy diet is often called a healthy eating pattern or a healthy eating plan. These terms are interchangeable. You will see me use both of these terms in this webinar. Now let's explore lifestyle changes in a bit more detail. To reduce high blood pressure or the risk for high blood pressure, consume a healthy dietary pattern that emphasizes vegetables, fruits, and whole grains, includes low-fat dairy products, and low-fat protein sources such as poultry, fish, and legumes, includes unsaturated fat vegetable oils and nuts, and limits the intake of sweets, sugar-sweetened beverages, and red meats. Finally, modifying this pattern is modified to meet caloric needs. There are several dietary plans that meet this dietary pattern, and we'll talk about that in a moment. The next thing you can do to reduce your risk for high blood pressure is you can reduce dietary sodium. Average sodium consumption of adults in the U.S. averaged more than 3,400 milligrams of sodium per day. Reducing sodium consumption below 2,300 milligrams resulted in lower blood pressure. Reducing daily sodium consumption below 1,500 milligrams resulted in even further blood pressure reductions. This slide shows the major sources of sodium in the typical American diet. The red section of the circle illustrates that most sodium in the American diet, 77%, comes from processed foods. The lime green wedge shows home cooking provides only 5% of sodium in the American diet. The dark green wedge illustrates that, contrary to popular belief, salt added with a salt shaker at the table is not a major contributor of sodium in the diet, only 6% of all the sodium. Finally, the blue wedge illustrates that 12% of sodium in the diet is naturally occurring in food. For example, lima beans contain 90 milligrams of sodium per cup. Celery contains 104 milligrams of sodium per cup. Skim milk has 127 milligrams of sodium per cup. A large egg has 63 milligrams per egg. And extra lean ground beef has 60 milligrams per 3-ounce serving. Top food sources of sodium in the American diet include breads and rolls, cold cuts and cured meats, pizza, poultry, soups, sandwiches, cheese, pasta dishes, meat dishes, and snacks. Now, in our programs, we provide tips for helping people lower their dietary sodium. For example, cook meals at home. When cooking, use spices instead of salt. Limit use of prepared foods when cooking. Modify favorite recipes. Reduce sodium. Limit use of prepared foods when cooking. Compare sodium content on food packages. Buy no salt added products. Buy fresh, frozen, with no sauce or no salt added canned vegetables. Use lean, fresh meat rather than canned or processed meats. And limit your use of sauces, mixes, and instant products. What other strategies do you recommend for reducing dietary sodium that you recommend to participants? Please type your strategies into the chat box and send to everyone. Using a healthy dietary pattern in combination. So to reduce blood pressure, also following a healthy dietary pattern in conjunction with reduce sodium. Follow a healthy dietary pattern and reduce sodium at the same time. The blood pressure lowering effect of these two strategies is greater when these dietary changes are combined. Using a healthy dietary pattern in combination with lower sodium consumption will reduce blood pressure even further. We will talk more about healthy eating patterns in just a few minutes. What questions do you have? The following scenario starts on the bottom of page 3 on your worksheet. Participant Christina tells you her doctor has told her she needs to reduce sodium and saturated fat in her diet. Her family loves her cooking, so she's trying to modify favorite family recipes to make them healthier. She gives you one of her recipes and asks for help. What changes would you suggest to Christina to make this recipe healthier? Make these changes on the recipe located on your worksheet, page 3. So the recipe to modify, Mama's red beans and rice. What was one change you suggested for Christina's recipe? Now here's the modified recipe. Major modifications would be to use skinless chicken in place of sausage, and that would reduce saturated fat and salt. You could use no salt or low salt canned vegetables, and rinse beans with added salt if that's what you have, and that would reduce the salt. Omit added salt. Big ones. So the next strategy, healthy lifestyle change you can make, you can reduce your risk for high blood pressure when you increase your physical activity. Recommended physical activity for adults is to engage in 2.5 hours of moderate to vigorous aerobic physical activity each week, and engage in aerobic activity in episodes of at least 10 minutes, preferably spread throughout the week. Additional health benefits are gained with more physical activity. Now, here's some examples of physical activities. And I'm not going to read these, although they are on your worksheet on page 4. But what I want to do is talk a little bit about what defines moderate versus what defines vigorous. And moderate physical activity, you can think of it when you're engaging in moderate physical activity, you can talk but not sing. With vigorous physical activity, you can only say a few words without stopping to catch your breath. And let's say a bit about people with medical conditions. In their case, physical activity is still recommended. People with chronic health conditions gain health benefits from regular physical activity, just like the rest of us. When adults with chronic conditions do activities according to their abilities, physical activity is safe. And adults with chronic conditions should be under the care of a healthcare provider. People with chronic conditions and symptoms should consult their healthcare provider about the types and amounts of activity appropriate for them. Another strategy to reduce your risk for high blood pressure is to maintain or achieve a healthy weight. If you are overweight, weight. Even small amounts of weight loss, 10 pounds, may result in lower blood pressure. Other lifestyle changes that can reduce your risk for high blood pressure include limiting alcohol consumption to no more than 2 drinks per day for men or 1 drink per day for women. A national committee was convened to review and synthesize the available scientific evidence on the prevention, detection, evaluation, and treatment of high blood pressure, and issued a report that offered guidance to primary care physicians who were working with patients with high blood pressure. In this report, this table is from that report. This table is from that report. And summarizes the blood pressure changes that may be expected with changes in lifestyle activities. Data from this table were summarized from a literature review. Data from this table were based on a comprehensive review of all available research studying the impact of lifestyle changes on blood pressure. And research has shown the following blood pressure changes with the implementation of these lifestyle changes. So the first line is weight reduction, and the recommendation is to maintain a normal body weight. And by doing so, people who lost weight and had kilogram weight loss reduced their systolic blood pressure from between 5 and 20 points. Adopting the dietary approaches to stop hypertension, that's the DASH eating plan, which is a plan rich in vegetables, fruits, and low-fat dairy products with reduced saturated fat and total fat. The systolic blood pressure was reduced between 8 and 14 points. Physical activity, engaging in regular aerobic physical activity, 30 minutes a day most days, resulted in a systolic blood pressure reduction of between 4 and 9 units. Modifying dietary sodium, reducing sodium to no more than 2,400 milligrams of sodium per day, resulted in a blood pressure reduction of between 2 and 8 units. And limiting alcohol to no more than 2 drinks a day for men or 1 drink per day for women resulted in a systolic blood pressure reduction of between 2 and 4 units. It should be noted that it takes from 1 to 3 months for exercise to result in reduced blood pressure, but you have to continue to exercise to maintain lower blood pressure. What questions do you have? Please type them into the chat box and send them to the presenter. So here's a scenario. Anna comes up to your class to you after a class and says she enjoys the physical activity breaks during class. She shares she went for a brisk 3-mile walk with a girlfriend the other day and was surprised when she felt winded and tired after the walk. This has motivated her to exercise more. She asks you to suggest some low-cost ways she can be more active. What would you suggest? Please record your answer on page 5 of the worksheet. What did you suggest for Anna? So, suggesting any activity that does not require equipment to keep costs down, that's one recommendation you can make because she was looking for low-cost activities. So you can look at that list of moderate and active, vigorous physical activities. And also recommended you suggest to Anna that she talk to her health care provider about a physical activity plan that's right for her. What questions do you have? All right, so now we're going to go into some, we're going to take a look at the dietary patterns that help to reduce the risk for high blood pressure. In the Dietary Guidelines for Americans 2010, several dietary patterns were recommended that met the dietary guidelines for Americans. These include bi-plate, the dietary approaches to stop hypertension, Mediterranean dietary pattern, and a vegetarian dietary pattern. All these dietary plans are similar. They all balance calorie intake and expenditures to achieve and maintain a healthy weight. They all encourage the consumption of vegetables and fruits and whole grains, low-fat dairy products, and plant-based protein sources such as beans, legumes, and nuts. And except for the vegetarian plan, all encourage moderate consumption of lean meats, poultry, and fish. Finally, all discourage the consumption of saturated fats, added sugars, and excess sodium. We will focus for a moment on the DASH eating plan. DASH was designed for people who have high blood pressure. Extensive research has been done to show the effectiveness of this eating plan to reduce high blood pressure. So, the research, Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension, is an evidence-based eating plan that has been shown to reduce high blood pressure. The first research studies on DASH ran from 1993 to 1997. And the research showed that the DASH dietary pattern was effective in lowering high blood pressure compared to a typical American eating pattern. The research also showed that reducing sodium resulted in a decrease in high blood pressure independent of the type of dietary plan. In other words, reducing sodium and consuming either the DASH dietary plan or a typical American eating pattern resulted in lowering of high blood pressure. The low sodium, 1,500 milligram DASH eating plan resulted in the greatest reduction in blood pressure. The blood pressure lowering happened quickly, 2 weeks of starting DASH. So the research on the DASH dietary plan was sponsored by the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute of the National Institutes of Health. The first printing of Your Guide to Lowering Your Blood Pressure with DASH was published by the National Institutes of Health in 1998. And this guide was based on the results of the research that was done. The booklet has been updated and is available on the NIH website as a PDF. explore how DASH compares to My Plate guidelines. A table that compares these two dietary patterns is located on page 6 of your worksheet. There are some minor differences between the food groups in DASH and in My Plate. Each food group has a similar number of servings. So in the grain group, My Plate recommends 6 ounces and DASH recommends between 6 and 8 ounces for a 2,000 calorie diet. For vegetables, My Plate is 2.5 cups and DASH is 2 to 2.5 cups. Fruits, My Plate is 2 cups and DASH is 2 to 2.5 cups. Fat-free or low-fat milk and milk products, 3 cups for My Plate, and for DASH it's 2 to 3 cups. And lean meats, poultry, and fish, for My Plate it's 5.5 ounces, and in this group it includes beans, legumes, and nuts. In DASH, they recommend 6 ounces of lean meats, poultry, and fish, but they break out the nuts, seeds, and legumes, so the non-meat protein sources, and encourage people to have non-meat protein 4 or 5 servings per week. And these servings would be part of that 6 ounces of the lean meats, poultry, and fish. I should mention I didn't list examples of portion sizes, but they are in that table in your worksheet. Finally, fats, oils, and sweets are all discouraged in the My Plate and DASH diets, but they're described in different ways. So fats and oils in DASH, they recommend no more than 2 to 3 servings per day. And sweets and added sugars, they recommend no more. They recommend 5 or less servings per week. In contrast, My Plate instead talks about solid fats and added sugars, and recommends no more than 260 calories per day of solid fats and added sugars at the 2,000 calorie level. That calorie level will change. In summary, the dietary patterns of both plans is quite similar. Dietary patterns of My Plate and DASH dietary. The My Plate and DASH dietary plans are similar. My Plate, DASH dietary plans are quite similar. Both dietary plans encourage whole grains, but DASH encourages all grains be whole grains. Both dietary plans encourage consumption of non-meat protein sources, but DASH has a separate food group to encourage non-meat protein consumption. And both dietary plans discourage consumption of saturated fats, sweets, and sugar-sweetened beverages. What are the implications for FNEC programming? FNEC nutrition education is based on My Plate and the dietary guidelines. And DASH is a dietary plan recommended in the Dietary Guidelines 2010. People people with high blood pressure will benefit from participating in the FNEC program. The DASH dietary plan was designed to have a healthy balance of calories, macronutrients like fat, protein, and carbohydrate, and to contain adequate amounts of fiber and nutrients involved in blood pressure regulation. This slide shows the amounts and percentages of each. So the DASH nutrient goals, the dietary pattern has 27% of calories from fat, only 6% of calories from saturated fat, 18% of calories from protein, 55% of calories from carbohydrate, 150 milligrams of cholesterol per day, which is about an amount of cholesterol in half an egg, sodium, 2,300 milligrams, potassium, 4,700 milligrams, calcium, 1,250 milligrams, and magnesium, 500 milligrams, and fiber, 30 grams. It should be noted again that the DASH was also tested with a 1,500 milligram sodium content and was found to be even better for lowering blood pressure. Worked very well for adults who already had high blood pressure, African Americans, and middle-aged and older adults. So rather than talk about so now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the food groups and where those you may find those nutrients that are important in blood pressure regulation. So in the grain group, the grains provide energy and fiber. Vegetables provide potassium, magnesium, and fiber. Fruits provide potassium, magnesium, and fiber as well. Fat-free or low-fat milk products provide calcium and protein. Lean meats, poultry, and fish provide protein and magnesium. And nuts, seeds, and legumes provide energy, protein, magnesium, and fiber. Finally, for fats and oils, 27% of calories from fat is the target for diet. What questions do you have? Please type them into the chat box and send them to the presenter. In summary, the DASH dietary pattern has been well researched and has resulted in reduction of high blood pressure among people who have followed the plan. DASH and MyPlate guidelines are very similar. There is much overlap in the guidance, though it is described in a slightly different way. MyPlate is a healthy eating plan for anyone over age 2, and DASH was designed to reduce high blood pressure in a subset of the American population who had high blood pressure or was at risk for high blood pressure. Because the guidelines overlap extensively, people with high blood pressure will benefit from participating in FNEC nutrition education programs. So our next scenario, Jane has been diagnosed with high blood pressure and was prescribed the DASH eating plan by her doctor. She asks you if participating in an FNEC class series would help her achieve her dietary goals. What would you say to her? Please write your answer on page 7 of the worksheet. Will the FNEC program help Jane achieve her dietary goals? Yes. Jane will learn how to eat healthy on a budget, how to read food labels in order to identify healthier food choices, how to sample and prepare quick, easy, and low-cost meals, and she'll get new ideas for getting and staying active. So today we learned that our risk for high blood pressure and consequent chronic disease risk can be reduced if we consume a dietary pattern that emphasizes fruits, vegetables, and whole grains, includes low-fat dairy products and lean meat, poultry, or fish, includes non-meat protein sources such as nuts and legumes, and is low in saturated fat, added sweets, and sodium. We can reduce our risk for high blood pressure if we reduce dietary sodium, maintain a healthy weight, limit alcohol consumption, don't smoke. How will you use this information in your work with FNEC and in your personal life? Please take a moment to write that on your worksheet. Page 7 of the worksheet. What questions do you have? Thank you. Thank you.